It's the finale of the Showa era as Godzilla takes on Mechagodzilla and newcomer Titanosaurus in the final Showa era film before we head into the Heisei era. It's Terror of Mechagodzilla, here on the Atomic Lizards podcast.
Hello and welcome to Atomic Lizards. We're a trio of friends podcasting about the Godzilla franchise and other films we love. I'm Miranda, the film fanatic.
I'm Udi, the de facto film expert.
And I'm Dan, the Kaiju extraordinaire.
Episode of Kaiju Korner, we're covering Terror of Mechagodzilla from 1975.
A submarine expedition to salvage the remains of Mechagodzilla is thwarted by a massive dinosaur named Titanosaurus. An Interpol investigation leads a biologist to uncover the work of Dr. Mafune and his mysterious daughter Katsuda. Aligned with the black hole aliens, Katsuda's life becomes entwined with the resurrected machine.
Terror of Mechagodzilla was directed by Ishiro Honda, written by Yukiko Takayama, and produced by Tomoyuki Tanaka and Henry G. Saperstein, with special effects by Tadashi Nakaro. It is the 15th film in the Godzilla franchise and the last film in the Showa era. It was the final film directed by series creator Ishiro Honda before his death. Terror of Mechagodzilla stars Katsuhiko Sasaki, Tomoko Ai, Akihiko Hirata, and Goro Matsumi, and features Toru Kawai, Kazunori Mori, and Tatsumi Nikamoto as the fictional monster characters Godzilla, Mechagodzilla, and Titanosaurus.
Episode will have spoilers, so go watch it if you haven't yet. Now let's get started. What did you guys think of the last Showa era film, Terror of Mechagodzilla? Dan, do you want to start us off today?
Yeah, I don't mind starting us off. So, yeah, the final film in the Showa era. It is interesting that we got two Mechagodzilla movies in the Showa era. I don't think there's any other monster outside of Ghidorah in the Showa era that has had like two films dedicated to them. So that's kind of interesting. Although I feel like Titanosaurus is like in a majority of this movie. So in some ways, it's like a Mechagodzilla and a Titanosaurus movie. I feel like Titanosaurus like got the most screen time out of like everybody, which is interesting. I kind of like Titanosaurus. I think he's a cool design, and unfortunately, I think this is the only movie he appears in, which is a shame because I would love to see him appear again in like other movies. But oh well, it's cool to see him here. He has an interesting roar. Like I kind of like the sound design. It's different. But yeah, in terms of the actual movie itself, do you remember last episode, Udi, how you said like Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla was just kind of, another one of these? That's how I honestly feel about this movie. I just feel like, okay, I mean, it's another, Showa era movie. There's really not, there are some aspects to it that I do admire, like the whole plot with the android, like the cyborg or android daughter or whatever. I thought that was interesting, and how that one scientist, how he like resents humanity. That's kind of interesting. Like I feel like there's a story, definitely a story to be told there, but in the end, it's like a Showa era movie. So, there's going to be like giant monster battles and crazy aliens and like sci-fi craziness and whatnot. So like not a lot of focus is put on that, but it's still, I think, does make this movie stand out a little bit because they do some interesting stuff there. And I know that there's actually a lot of people in the fandom that bring this movie up as like an example of, not everything in the Showa era was silly, because they're talking about the storyline between the scientist and his daughter here. And like, there's even like kind of a thought-provoking quote near the end of the movie where it's like, see, you're crying tears, that means you are human and whatnot. Kind of like, it kind of reminded me of in Blade Runner, how like the replicants are like, are we human or are we not, so it's kind of interesting in that respect.
Like tears and rain.
Yeah, exactly, dude. Exactly. So, yeah, I do admire that part of the movie. I think that that helps the plot stand out a little bit. But other than that, like once again, I really just didn't find much there for this movie outside of that. I mean, like I said, I like Titanosaurus. I think he's cool. But like Godzilla, I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure Godzilla doesn't show up until like 40 minutes into the movie's runtime. And this movie's like only an hour and 23 minutes long. So it's like Godzilla's barely in the movie, you know? So I don't think this like deserves to be considered a bad Showa era movie. I don't think this is a bad Showa era movie. I don't think this deserves to be grouped with like All Monsters Attack or Son of Godzilla, you know, or any of those movies. But I'm not sure I would put it higher up, you know, with the 54 film or Mothra versus Godzilla. I would probably put this somewhere in the middle. I personally enjoyed the original Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla a little more than this one, but it's not bad. It's not terrible. I think in terms of it being the last Showa era movie, I felt like this was a better movie than Destroy All Monsters, but I felt like Destroy All Monsters had the spectacle of being the final Showa era Godzilla movie. There's some like decent fights in here, monster fights, but it didn't have the spectacle that Destroy All Monsters had. So in terms of it, in terms of the spectacle of being the last Showa era Godzilla movie, it really didn't impress me too much. But that being said, it's not a bad movie. What about you guys? How are you feeling about this?
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way as you, Dan. This was just kind of like another one of these. It wasn't bad, and I also agree that I think that the first Mechagodzilla movie was better. But I mean, yeah, it was definitely just kind of weird. This definitely felt like we got to a point where they were like, all right, well, you know, typical, like we got an alien race invading Earth, you know, trying to take over the monsters, and then they're gonna fight Godzilla, and then that's it. Like, it really felt like they didn't really know what else to do at this point anymore with these, and they were just kind of making them to make them. Really, just like this one, the last few, I mean, they have all been kind of similar, but it really, like, this one really just felt like they were just making it to make it and to get it out the door. And that's not meant to sound as bad as I'm making it sound, but it definitely felt like, in a way, the least inspired, I guess. But, I mean, Titanosaurus is cool. I mean, he's an interesting kaiju, and, he has a fun design, so I mean that aspect was cool. But I mean, again, like comparing him to Gigan, like Gigan is way cooler. So I mean, again, it's one of those things of like it's not a bad movie, it's not a bad show era movie, but I mean, when you had Gigan before, it's like I don't know, can't really top that. But I still liked it, you know, it's fine. And I agree with you though. I remember I was watching and like I think it's just because of the intro is I think just like a recap of the last Mechagodzilla movie, I think. So like you see this footage of Godzilla fighting Mechagodzilla and it's like okay, all right. And then I just kind of forgot that they didn't show Godzilla like at all until like you said till like basically the third act and it's like oh my god, we haven't even seen him the whole time. Good lord. Like he's just been MIA completely. Didn't even show him at all. That's crazy. That being said, I mean like it was fun when he showed up and I mean the third act was a typical Showa era third act. So I mean it was, you know, fine and enjoyable. I will say, because I figured this out. I think it was last episode we were talking about. I was talking about like which Mechagodzilla version was my favorite, and then I think you asked me if it was Kuryu, and then I was like, I don't know, and then you're like, no, I think it's Mechagodzilla too. It is actually Kuryu who's my favorite Mechagodzilla. So just to clarify, that is my favorite Mechagodzilla from the Millennium era. But yeah, this Mechagodzilla, I mean, he looked pretty. For being like a Mark II, he looked pretty much the same. So I mean, he's still cool, but it's got nothing on Kuryu. But yeah, I mean, I don't really have too much else to say, at least for now. So what about you, Miranda? What did you think of the Terror of Mechagodzilla?
Enjoyed this one. I think it is unique and has certain plot elements that we haven't really seen before. I mean, yeah, there's aliens, yeah, giant monster fights. Those are pretty traditional, but like this one spends time with interesting female character that isn't just a photographer or a news writer or in the background. Like we actually kind of get to know more about I can't remember her character name, but we get the daughter, I guess. We get to see a bit more of her character plot, and I think the like plot between like the police and the aliens, and I think it's all woven together pretty well. Kaiju fight at the end is pretty like on par with everything else. I mean, we've watched over 15 of these counting the MonsterVerse ones, so I am getting a smidge tired of watching the same dinosaur fight the exact same dinosaur, but this one we got a little different fight in there with Titanosaurus and Mechagodzilla. I thought the like shots of Mechagodzilla from like when he's in the like the cave with the aliens when they're rebuilding him were really cool. There's some cool perspective shots of Titanosaurus from like down below, like it's in the beginning where he like jumps out of the water. So that was nice to see. In general, I had a good time watching this one. But my Letterboxd review basically just says I've officially watched my first run through of the Showa era, and so now I've completed my second watch of the Showa era, which is really fun. And I think this was a good conclusion to the series, although it wasn't technically the official end. Like Toho didn't say they were going to stop making Godzilla movies. It was just like 9 years until they made another one. So this is the end of that era before they started the new ones. But yeah, let's get into the story. So the story was written by Takayama, who won a story contest that Toho put on to find the follow-up to Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. So she submitted a story and was selected. So she got to come in and write the script for this movie. According to the Wikipedia, for this movie, it said that Honda said that he thought a woman's perspective was especially fresh for the genre. So that's pretty neat. There was some changes to her original script, but most of it stayed the same. So, like, she's the one that, like, wrote this script and was like, let's have the main woman, the daughter, be a cyborg. Let's have her kind of be conflicted on whether or not she's human or if she's a robot. Like, does she go with the aliens? Does she go with her humanity? And, like, that type of conflict. And then they changed some other stuff, which I'll probably get into later. But she is also one of the only women to work in the writer's room for Godzilla at the time. I'm not entirely sure about the rest of the eras and present day, but I thought that was a pretty neat fact. That's really cool to me. And yeah, so that's just a bit about how this movie was created. I did like this plot. I thought it was interesting. I watched these movies and yeah, Godzilla's in it, but like really I want it like an interesting human story. And a lot of these movies do like intrigue me because I like that silly camp sci-fi-ness. It's not always the most in-depth or the most well-put stories for the human stories in these movies, but I thought this one was really unique to the Showa era because we haven't really seen that before. And also it kind of like introduced the whole like human mind control thing, psychic connection to Mechagodzilla, which we see later on in the other eras. To my knowledge, we see that. So I thought that was really cool, and like I don't know, I just found it really interesting because the daughter does like have that conflict between like, no, you can't have my father's notes, I burned them, but then she's like, well, no, I should help them, and then gives the notes, or it's like stuff like that. So I don't know. That's where I am with this movie.
Yeah, so I actually had no idea that that's where like how this movie was written. That's kind of cool. Like, especially because could you imagine like writing a contest for like entering a contest to write a movie in like your favorite franchise or whatever, and you get like officially selected to work the script? Like, that's cool. So I had no idea. In terms of like the story and whatnot, I do think this stands out from other Showa era movies because like a lot of the Showa era plots are, especially in around this time, are just aliens, giant monsters, they fight, and that's it. I mean, sometimes they like to shake it up a bit, like they'll put in like secret agents in there or kidnappings and whatnot. But yeah, most of the time the plots between all the Showa era films kind of just blur together for me personally. But this one does stand out. I like the whole idea of like the robot girl figuring out what she should do and whatnot. Like, that is interesting. And like the scientist subplot and whatnot. I did find all of that interesting, but other than that, there's really not much else I really have to say in terms of the movie's plot, because once again, like, while those parts are interesting, that's not really most of what the movie focuses on, I felt. But yeah, there wasn't really much that I like disliked about it. I mean, I wish they could have dove deeper into the humanity aspects of it with the cyborg daughter and whatnot. Like, I wish we could have gotten more insight on that, but I don't know if that's necessarily what they wanted to focus on for this movie, which is understandable, but yeah.
Movie was also on a really tight schedule too.
That too, yeah. And with how short it was, yeah.
Let's get it out now. And then, yeah, this movie
Yeah.
is the least attended Godzilla film in Japan.
Oh, really?
It is also one of the only 2 Godzilla films to sell less than 1 million tickets. And this
Wow.
is because of like the decline in attendance for monster movies at the time.
I did not know that. No, geez, no wonder it took them 9 years to make the next movie.
Yeah, they were like, that was not doing so great. And then TV picked up, so everyone's like watching Ultraman in their house. So
yeah.
have to compete with that as well. Agree with you that I wish they could have expanded more on the humanity aspects, like just build that out a bit more. But it's a movie from 1975, and it's an hour and a half. So, truthfully, I wasn't expecting much in terms of this one.
Yeah, I didn't know either about what you were like talking about, Miranda, that the story was written like and chosen in a contest. So that's pretty cool. I can't imagine how much pressure that would be, but kind of neat. I can't imagine a studio doing that nowadays. That would be oof. Unless it was like a short or something like that, there's no way that they would ever let someone do that. On the one hand, they would have to pay the person way less, but on the other hand, there's no way they're risking that much money on a fan story. So I honestly don't really look at the credits on these until like right before we record or whatever. So I wasn't aware that there was a woman that played a part in writing this story. It's almost odd to me, like looking back at the movie, knowing that now, I definitely feel like Gatsuda is more complex overall than a lot of the other women that have been in Godzilla movies, but that's still interesting though, and it's cool that she was one of the only women like working in the writers' room at the time. That's really cool though. It was a very like inoffensive movie, especially in comparison to the other Showa era movies. So I wouldn't say there's anything I inherently disliked in this movie. It was kind of like plug and play. It was like the same sort of setup as like a lot of the other movies that we just recently watched, but just slightly different details. I guess, just like randomly, but this one part did stick out to me, and I remember on like the first, because I rewatched it a little bit, because the first time I watched it, I was kind of doing some like cleaning in my room, so then I was like, no, I want to actually like sit down and watch it, so I rewatched it. But I remember the one part that like really got me to like pay attention for like a hot minute was just randomly, because I was just like, oh, okay, normal, setup for the Godzilla movie, whatever. And then all of a sudden, this girl goes to this panel and just gets electrocuted and dies. And I was like, oh my God, what? What happened? So then I rewatched it. I was like, good Lord. Okay. All right. So yeah, that was interesting. I was not expecting that to be part of the backstory. Overall, it wasn't bad, and they could have developed some of the ideas that they had more, and it probably would have been better. But basically, you have an hour to set up the whole human side of the story and set up the new kaiju antagonist and why Godzilla is going to come and fight or whatever. I guess it's not a lot of time, and I mean, I don't envy them at all. And I'm definitely not going to go and say that it's easy to do that, especially in an hour. So I mean, props to the writers' room and props to everyone who made one of these because I mean. Look, there may not be like Citizen Kane or anything like that, but most people that would be complaining about the story, whatever, I mean, me included, would probably be stumped trying to come up with enough story to fill in an hour, where like at least like maybe a little bit more, but like the solid last 20 minutes is all just going to be like kaiju action, and you just have to set that up. So. I don't envy the people that were in those positions, but I mean, hopefully it was fun.
To fill an hour of time with an in-depth story is difficult. I attempted one time to write one short film, and it was an event, I would say. But like, I don't know how filmmakers do it. How do they have the stories in their head? Like, that's one thing that I'm not the most versed in is like creative storytelling, and the fact that these people who did the Godzilla movies and that there's people doing it now today, even for like the suckiest of movies, it's like that takes some kind of skill and like knowledge on how to connect with people, which is really fascinating, and I would love to learn more.
I never got to make it, but I mean, for this project that I had in college, I was supposed to. I wrote out a feature. If I had kept writing, it would have been a feature, but I had to kind of like wrap it up. I mean, I kept it more smaller scale, so it wasn't meant to be a feature, but it could have. Anyway, yeah, that is definitely one of the most interesting parts because at the end of the day, when you're writing, once you set up the basics, like you set up the characters and you set up the story, like it's really just up to you to decide like where you want to go and what you're trying to say with your story and everything like that. So, I've written down lots and lots and lots of ideas for different kinds of movies. No, I'm not saying all of them are like great ideas or all of them are like revolutionary or like stories that have never been told. But yeah, I don't know. Like it is very interesting to be in that process. Because yeah, I mean, you might have an idea for a story, but it really, when it comes down to it, you have to like sit down and write out every single detail. You have to write out how to make the PB&J. People understand how a PB&J is made, but you have to really explain who's grabbing what and in what order and blah 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 to like make it like a PB&J sandwich in the end.
It's like telling an alien how to make a PB&J. It's like,
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
There's so many steps and things.
Is it a lizard human hybrid?
Maybe. Or
Cockroach.
ape aliens, cockroach aliens. In this case, I don't know.
I thought it was like a lizard alien, honestly, but I don't know.
Well, for Terror of Mechagodzilla, they're the same aliens from the planet from Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, but they don't turn into apes when they die, so I don't know.
Yeah, these were the same ape aliens because like they were wearing like different headgear. Like it was like way like B-movie sci-fi headgear or whatever.
Interesting. Maybe they couldn't get the ape costumes back. Maybe they were filming like a Planet of the Apes movie and they're like, sorry, they're all booked out. And they're like, crap.
I was going to say that's weird because just go to a Spirit of Halloween and find an ape mask, So
I don't think they had Spirit Halloween in 1975.
Probably not, but still, you could find like a cheap costume store probably.
Anyways, I kind of derailed your point.
No, you're good.
Did you have more to say?
Well, just a little bit more. I also didn't want to like talk too much about it because it's not why we're here. But I mean, yeah, like it is kind of a fun process to be in, but it's also very challenging because I mean, yeah, like I remember I was writing out the story for my project and I mean, like I said, I could have kept going, and there was a few other story ideas that I had initially when I started my project that I didn't pursue because I was like, I will keep going and going and going and adding more, and I won't stop, and then I'll have way too much material, and I'll have to cut it down, and I won't be happy. Plus, scope is a good thing to keep in mind when you're making something, because you want to work with the scope that you can work with. So, like, I'm not gonna write a big sci-fi epic when I have $20 to my name, So just keeping things in check. But yeah. And so yeah, an hour of writing, or the equivalent of writing that you need to fill an hour of time in movie time. That was the most complicated way of saying that. Is a lot. So I don't blame anyone for how any of these movies came out. I mean, it's just cool that these movies got made at the end of the day, and kudos to them. Because yeah, it is challenging to figure out what you're doing, what you're saying, and filling in all this empty space. But at the end of the day, we get movies, so that's the cool thing.
It's a lot of work, and everyone who does it, well done, good job. Even if it's for a hobby, because like it's rough. I do think this movie, in my ranking, would probably sit higher than like Son of Godzilla. So I did like this
absolutely.
One. Like there are some Showa movies that are just like, why? But this one, not so much. I really do enjoy it. Some things I like in this movie is that Mechagodzilla has his rainbow laser eyes again. I do enjoy the fact that the aliens are back. You put an alien in a movie, and I'm most likely going to like it. Also, did you know the actor who played Dr. Serizawa is back in this movie? He plays the dad, or the scientist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, he plays the scientist? I didn't realize that. Wow.
Yeah, he's in like old makeup. But yeah, that's Dr. Serizawa. I wish I remembered his real name, but I don't, unfortunately. I have a theory about him. Dr. Serizawa never died in the original, and he just keeps adopting new identities. And that's why you see him in like almost every Godzilla movie.
In case you're wondering what Dr. Serizawa's actual the actor's name is Akiko Hirata. Akiko Hirata.
Thank you for getting that.
Yes, no problem.
Yeah. But yeah, that's my theory, that he just shows up everywhere because he's in hiding because he didn't actually really die.
That's a fun theory.
Yeah. I mean, it's silly, but...
Why would he turn against humanity, though?
Maybe the oxygenator. The oxygenator.
Did you really just call the oxygen destroyer the oxygenator?
It's not like it has some sort of fancy name, all right? I went Doofenshmirtz on that one.
That works too.
The oxygenator. Maybe the oxygen destroyer sucked all the oxygen out of his brain, so it wiped his memory and he turned evil.
Yeah, maybe. But then what about his eye patch? Was he wearing an eye patch for no reason?
It healed
for
his
the
vision.
Aesthetic.
Yeah,
because it makes him look cool. There we go.
Yeah. He's like, this is chic.
Although, if I remember, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that Dr. Serizawa lost his eye in the war.
I'll take your word for it, just because you've watched that movie more than me, but I really don't remember.
Well,
it would make sense.
They don't say in the movie. I think it's just one of those like background details that like one of the directors said in passing or whatever.
I gotcha. But yeah, going back to what you were talking about, Miranda. Yeah, I mean, it is kind of funny, and I had like a similar thought when I was watching. I was like, "Huh, Dr. Serizawa's back. What do you know?" And I was like, "It would be kind of funny if like at the end of this movie he's like, aha, I'm Dr. Serizawa. I've been Dr. Serizawa this whole time." But I was like, they're not going to go that way. But it would be kind of funny.
Wait, Udi, so did you recognize Dr. Serizawa's actor underneath all the gray hair and whatnot?
Because at the beginning, before like they show footage when he's like quote unquote younger, and it's just Dr. Serizawa, and then then with the makeup on, I was like, oh, it's Dr. Serizawa, but with like old man makeup. Okay,
because I was going to say, because I didn't recognize him at all, but I guess I must not have been paying attention that well when they showed the flashback when he was younger.
I guess Superman's disguise would really work on you then. I mean, to be fair, Superman disguises just glasses and like a hunch and baggy clothes, whereas like this man had old man makeup. So I mean, he looked completely different. But I was teasing either way.
Well, he's also wearing a mustache. It's like the classic glasses and mustache disguise, you know? It works.
The old version of the new baseball cap and sunglasses.
Yeah,
Or
basically.
trench coat.
Oh, yeah. Trench coat.
Yeah. So.
Like freaking Raphael walking around New York City in just a trench coat and hat. How does nobody have a giant mutated turtle underneath?
I mean, do people really notice giant mutated lizards walking around? I mean, I guess when they're as tall as your buildings, you kind of do notice.
If they're destroying Tokyo, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, if they're destroying Tokyo, you're definitely going to notice. Speaking of them destroying Tokyo, though, the day for night in this movie is, it's not as bad as the last movie, but it's still not great. It basically just looked like daytime and was slightly blue. Again, I think that's due to budget stuff, probably. Also, it's probably hard to film at night. Yeah, I noticed that in the movie.
The Showa era is definitely like not known for its special effects. But I know that like last episode, Udi had mentioned like it kind of reminded him of the home movies that him and his friend Mike would make. And I say this with like the utmost respect for the Showa era because I couldn't make these movies. I couldn't. But they do give off like a home movie feel sometimes with some of the effects that they do. So
yeah, adds to their charm.
I agree.
My favorite part in regards to that is like when you can clearly tell it's something that's just like a little plastic toy or like a little model. And it's like, that feels very home movie like. Like whenever they have like a close up of like a rocket ship or like a military tank or like a fighter jet, it's like that's definitely just a little toy that they got. But hey, I mean, it works. It's cool.
Miniatures were the thing back in the day. It's not like they could CGI it or anything. Be like, yep, here's our toy boat in the middle of the ocean. Here's our submarine. I did like the underwater parts, though, like at the beginning with the submarine and Titanosaurus, like attacking it. I thought those were done really well, even though you could tell that it was like a toy boat.
Yeah, those are cool. Plus, like the little like, is it called like a typhoon or like the whirlpool? Like that was cool. But just to go back really quickly to what you're talking about, Dan, with the special effects. Yeah, I mean the special effects, especially compared to like now, they're not like, super impressive, I guess. But I mean, just for the time, like they're impressive. But also, just besides that, I honestly feel like, I mean, yeah, like you're saying, it's not that it's all bad. And there's definitely parts that are just very charming and whatnot. But there's a lot of parts that honestly are just kind of cool looking. Obviously, they look kind of cheesy, whatever. But they have a nice aesthetic to them that maybe it's just like a retro whatever, but like basically a lot of the destruction scenes for me honestly work, like Mechagodzilla walking through the city and just melting everything with his rainbow beam, or I think even in the previous Mechagodzilla movie, when it was Mechagodzilla and Gigan, both of them when they were wrecking shop, like all of that looked really, really good. And I think part of it is just that they used either real fire, real explosions, whatever, to some degree, because like the flames look really good. And I think that is definitely one area where it doesn't take me out of movies, but it's definitely something that it can be very noticeable if flames or explosions or whatever don't look quite right. I can usually tell right away. And so when I do see a good flame in whether it be a video game or a movie, I'm like, wow, that's really impressive, because they really are hard to get right. And so I mean, like in movies like this, I mean, again, they probably just used like actual flames or whatever, so it looks really good. And so I feel like that really does help ground the look of a lot of these destruction sequences. And I mean, like with Mechagodzilla, you obviously, we know that the rainbow beams aren't real, but I think they do a good job of comping the rainbow beams over the footage so that it really does look like they're destroying the cities, and everything else might look kind of homemade or whatever, but I think the destruction scenes are really the spot where the special effects shine for sure.
Oh yeah, I 100% agree with you. I mean, that's where these movies shine, is in the destruction scenes, and I think that's what makes these movies famous. I mean, people go for the giant monsters, so I agree.
They do use a lot of actual, like, real explosions and stuff. Lots of firecrackers. A lot of shooting firecrackers at people, which is unsafe. Don't do that. But, so, like, there are some really cool, like, set pieces where they use, I guess, pyrotechnics to, like, make really cool things. And flame is a very difficult thing to do with a computer nowadays. Like, I do like the fact that in this era, in the Showa era, it's like, nope, that's real fire. Like, that's real water. Like, these are people doing, like, things and being creative and imaginative and working with what they have and trying to figure out how to show their vision with the technology they had in 1954 and 63 and, like, 75, across, like, those years.
Yeah, I agree. And just out of curiosity, do you guys have a favorite special effect that we either in this movie or just in the Showa era in general?
I mean, the first ones that pop into my head is anytime, like, we see Godzilla like do his atomic breath, or like Mechagodzilla with the laser rainbow eyes, or like Ghidorah with his, like, electrical bolts. Like, just those, like, hand drawn touch special effects are really, really neat, because, like, it's just really cool. Like, it's like someone sat down and they had to draw that out and they had to figure out what it was going to look like, and then they had to, like, do that frame by frame, or however they did it with cells or whatever. I don't really know how it worked back in the day, but, like, any, like, hand drawn, like, element is just really cool to me.
Yeah, I would have to agree there, but I would say my favorite special effect out of the entire Showa era is definitely from Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, where Mechagodzilla spins his head and creates a shield around himself.
Yeah,
I don't know
yeah,
why,
that was
but
cool.
That's a good one.
I just really like that moment. It's so silly, but also kind of cool and whatnot. So I'd have to go with that. But like Miranda was saying, I also like some moments where Godzilla just shoots his atomic breath. Like, I don't know why, but I really like the moment in I think it's Godzilla or Ebra Horror of the Deep. I really like the moment in Ebra Horror of the Deep where Mothra comes to save everybody, and then, like, Godzilla just out of nowhere tries to atomic breath her. Like, I don't know. I always found that moment kind of funny. So I like that little moment too. So, but yeah. What about you, Udi? Do you have any favorite, like, special effects?
I mean, of course, the classic Mechagodzilla rainbow beam is super cool and unique, and like you said, the King Ghidorah lightning bolts are fun. I also like, I don't remember which movie it's in, but there's one specific scene in a movie in the Showa era where Godzilla's, like, on a pier, and it's probably multiple, so it'll be basically impossible for you to find maybe exactly or think of which one I'm talking about. But there's one particular one that I'm thinking of that's on a pier. I think it was, like, in the last, like, I don't know, like 5 or 6 movies, somewhere in there, and Godzilla's, like, on a pier or something, or, like, on a dock, and then he atomic breaths, and it looked really cool. So there's that one, and then I also like, it doesn't really make any sense, or at least I don't understand it, but I also kind of liked the water effect before Titanosaurus emerges from the water. Like, it's just, like, glowing water and bubbling, and all of a sudden, boom, he just appears, like, shoots out of the water. Kind of like a silly one, but I liked it.
So was the moment you were thinking of, Udi, was that when Godzilla attacks New York and destroy all monsters?
Maybe, but I really don't remember. Like, I know it wasn't, like, in the last, like, 3 that we've watched, I'm pretty sure, but it's definitely not, like, one of the earlier ones. So it's somewhere in, like I said, like, the last 5 or 6 movies.
I'll DM you a clip real quick, and then you can tell me if, like, it's it. Hold on a sec.
That was the right one. Look at you. You got it.
That's how big of a Godzilla nerd. Honestly, as soon as
Yeah,
you said
good
he was,
job.
As soon as you said he was on a pier, my mind instantly went to that moment. So that's just how big of a Godzilla nerd I am, sadly.
Nah, that's
That's
impressive,
not a sad
honestly.
thing.
Yeah,
That's really cool.
yeah. Because like I forgot it was an over the shoulder shot. I was like, "Ooh, yeah, that's good framing." Then like you get like the extra wide. It's not a wide shot, but like it's further away from how the camera was before, and then you get like the glowing scales. Like, oh yeah, that looks good. Plus like all the flames and stuff. Yeah, I like that one. Good job though.
That's really cool, Dan, that you could just get the scene just based off of Udi's description. Like, that's some skill. One of the details that I noticed was like the coloring on Titanosaur. I thought that was pretty neat. He's like an orange. But one of the elements from the original script was that this Titan or this monster was supposed to be two monsters who combined together and then would have been named Titan. But of course, due to budgetary reasons and whatnot, they combined that storyline and just had one kaiju. And he was supposed to attack Tokyo at the end of the movie instead of having the big fight in the countryside. Even with the changes, I think this monster is one of the more unique monsters in the Showa era, and it kind of sucks that he only has ever shown up in this movie. I wish we could see more of him because he's just really cool. Like I said, he's orange and red and yellow and has like a really cool mohawk fin, and his eyes are gold, and like just overall I like this creature design. And I like how they like work him into the story too and connecting it to the scientist Dr. Serizawa, I forget his character's name in this movie, and like the mind control device and how that features into the daughter's story and them controlling Mechagodzilla and all of that jazz. So yeah, I really liked him. Did you guys think he was a good addition to the Kaiju roster?
I actually didn't know he was originally supposed to be like two monsters, so that's cool. It's some neat little trivia. Yeah, I like Titanosaurus. I like his sound design. I think his design is like his overall like kaiju design is also really neat and unique. I wish we could have seen him in more movies. It sucks that this is the only film he appeared in, and yeah, I would love to see him in more. I mean, I don't know what Toho has planned next after Godzilla minus one. I mean, it seems like they want to start putting more quality over quantity into their movies, which I can appreciate. And I don't know what direction they want to go in, but if they want to do like more versus like kaiju movies, I would be okay with that. In fact, I'm thinking right now, when was the last time we even got a Toho versus movie? Probably not since Godzilla Final Wars, honestly, because Shin Godzilla was Godzilla only, and then there was the anime trilogy, but I mean those are their own thing. And then Godzilla minus one was also Godzilla only. So I think we're due for a new Toho Godzilla versus movie. And as much as I would love to see Godzilla fight King Ghidorah, Mothra, Rodan in like a modern like Toho movie, I wouldn't be opposed to them taking a crack at some of the other lesser monsters that haven't been utilized as much, like Hedorah, or like Titanosaurus, or heck, maybe even Megalon. And like we haven't seen Gigan in quite a while, so yeah, I wouldn't be opposed to another Toho versus movie. And yeah, like Titanosaurus would be cool. I'd be down for that.
We could always write another pitch letter and mail it off to Toho.
We could.
Like, here, this is what we want. Be like, if they had another contest, would you write in those monsters into your plot?
I'd take a crack at it. Sure, why not? I'm no screenwriter, but hey.
Yeah, be like, turns out here's all the monsters that you haven't featured in a while, and I'm gonna make them really cool. Don't know how I'm gonna do that, but I think that would probably be my pitch. But Udi, what did you think of Titanosaurus?
I mean, I agree with you guys. He was really cool. Definitely a fun and unique looking kaiju to add to the roster. In a way, he seems very normal looking compared to, especially some of the ones we just got recently, like Gigan and King Caesar. Which again, like King Caesar doesn't really look like a Toho monster. To me, he looks more like a Power Rangers kaiju. I feel like if they made a movie with Godzilla and Gearus and Titanosaurus, like that would be really cool because I feel like they all fit each other's aesthetic well. Whereas again, like I don't know, like I know to kind of contradict myself there, but like there's a certain subsect of like kaiju's from Toho that just have like a very Toho feel to them because they're just like wacky things combined. And then you also have more of like the naturalistic Toho stuff where it is just like Godzilla, who's just a giant atomic lizard, and Titanosaurus, who's just kind of like a tall, skinny dragon. They look like dinosaurs, so it is kind of an interesting thing to kind of look and compare the two because yeah, you have Anguirus, who's like that armored dinosaur whose name has escaped my mind.
Ankylosaurus.
Yeah, Ankylosaurus. And then you have Titanosaurus, who's just, like I said, kind of like a dragon dinosaur. So very cool. And it was kind of fun to see how they expanded his power set just throughout. Like, aha, he has a hidden fin that can produce high winds. Useful. So I don't know. It's just kind of fun to see how they evolved him over the runtime of the movie. But he was cool. And I mean, yeah, I agree. I'd be down to see him again. It's kind of a shame that some of these older monsters don't really appear again because they're fun, they're cool. I would definitely like to see them again. I mean, I don't know what the permissions or licensing work like the contracts are between like Toho and the Monsterverse, but I would definitely be down to see Toho cover more of like the original monsters because I mean they haven't really done any Toho stuff. I mean, there's only been 2 movies since then, but like King of the Monsters was like a huge like, oh, here are all the big ones, and then they kind of, I mean, it just Godzilla X Kong, which I mean is kind of its own thing, and then in the new one was fun. I mean, I like that movie, and like the like Shimu is really cool. Not to talk about that again, but yeah, it's just different. So I'd definitely be down to see more of these older Toho monsters come back.
The Godzilla X Kong monsters are really interesting, and I feel like they could have totally put Titanosaurus into that movie. Like, he has that vibe, which I guess means that Godzilla X Kong has the vibe of like Toho monsters, which I think we mentioned. Dan, I think you mentioned it. One of us mentioned it in our review.
Very Showa era.
Yeah, like they feel very Showa era. Yeah, which is very cool.
Agreed.
I feel like I say that all the time, but like seeing the past and then the present and how they like connect it's just so fascinating to me.
For sure. It's definitely cool to see how like the newer movies echo these older ones because they're almost like they almost feel like an homage in a way, even though they're kind of doing their own thing. But seeing them like harken back to this style is just cool. So I think I don't remember which one of us said it. It might have even been me. I don't know, but it's kind of like getting to see the vision that the directors at this time had in their brains, but like just couldn't achieve with the budget and technology constraints that they had at the time. But like now, with the budgets they have now, like they could in the VFX, like they can do in full. So like even though X Kong, the New Empire, doesn't have like the biggest budget ever, which I mean it's fine, it doesn't need like a huge budget. Like they're able to accomplish a lot with a ton of VFX, whereas like in these obviously they do a lot, and like we talked about, like a lot of the effects like look cool or are just charming, but obviously again like there's only so much you can do with people in rubber suits as we talked about before, but yeah, very cool. I did have a quick question. I don't remember if you said this. Did you know how you said that Titanosaurus was supposed to be 2 monsters originally that combined into one? Did the 2 individual monsters have different names, or were they unnamed?
I do not know.
Fair. Okay. I just wasn't sure if like they had different names, but that's interesting.
I just want to say on a side note, One thing I didn't mention is I do kind of like Godzilla's entrance in this movie. Because, yeah, it takes forever for him to finally appear, but I kind of like how Titanosaurus is just like destroying the city and like fighting the military, and then just Godzilla's atomic breath just hits him off screen, and then like the camera switches and like we see his like silhouette in darkness, but then like but then like the scene like lights up and then we see Godzilla in like all his glory. I do like that entrance. I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, and just to, because I don't think we've talked about it outside of that, Godzilla doesn't look bad in this movie, but it is kind of a shame that for his last outing in the Showa era, he's very goofy. He's very loosey goosey.
I would also like to comment on the suit here real quick because I don't think I have. The suit looks fine. It largely feels very similar to the suit from Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, which now like I actually don't remember if I commented on that suit either. So in case I didn't, I think the Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla suit is fine. It doesn't look as bad as some of the other previous suits. It doesn't look super worn out or anything, and it is easy to tell like between like the actual like Godzilla suit and like the fake quote unquote Godzilla that Mechagodzilla was, using at one point. Because there's like a different shot where Mechagodzilla reveals himself and like the face is just completely different, so you can like tell the difference there. But that's besides the point. Anyway, I thought the suit in Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla was fine. And this suit in Terror of Mechagodzilla largely feels the same. Like Udi said, though, it is a little loosey goosey at times, but there's been far worse, so I don't mind it too much.
Yeah, I mean, I can't disagree. There's definitely been worse iterations of the suit, but yeah, definitely not even remotely close to my favorite in this one. But yeah, I mean, he was barely in the movie anyway, so it wouldn't have made sense for them to spend like a ton of like budget either like fixing an older suit or making a brand new like really well designed suit, I guess. But yeah, like I said, just kind of a shame, but what can you do? At the very least, we got Titanosaurus and Mechagodzilla, who both looked really good. So
Look really good. I really liked their designs. And Godzilla, he looked like Godzilla. Like I don't have much to say about him, but like Mechagodzilla is really cool. Also, the movie is called Terror of Mechagodzilla, not Terror of Godzilla, so the fact that Godzilla is not really in this one wasn't that surprising to me. It's like, oh yeah, of course he'll show up a little bit at the end and fight some monsters, but like
But even so, once again, like even though it's called Terror of Mechagodzilla, I feel like it was mainly about Titanosaurus.
yeah, no, that's true. It wasn't Mechagodzilla didn't really show terror until the end too. But they probably needed to name it that in order to get butts and seats.
True.
Because I feel like if they came out with an original kaiju movie in 1975, it would not have gone so well.
I kind of like how at the end of the movie, when Godzilla defeats Titanosaurus, like Titanosaurus just plops down, like he's just like, eh, and then just like falls or whatever. I don't know. I thought that was kind of funny.
yeah, there were a lot of moments in this that were just, I mean, like there's been plenty of moments like this throughout like the Showa era movies, but there's a lot of movies in this that are just definitely not meant to be funny, but were just so over the top ridiculous that were kind of hilarious. Like the one guy, I don't remember his name, but I think he was spying on like the secret base that the aliens were in, and then like he tries to escape in the woods, and then like he gets surrounded by all the guards that were like hidden out there, and then they all just shoot him, and he just like goes like for like way too long. Just finally slowly falls and dies. It's like, oh my god, that was ridiculous. There's just like a lot of random funny things like that. Or I don't remember. I think it was the two aliens. I think it was like the commander and then, or maybe it was the commander and the character played by the guy who played Dr. Serizawa Akiko. But I think it's like when they're first together or something on screen, and then they're just both like, and then they cheers, and then like it moves on or something like that. I don't know, but A lot of just like funny moments like that. And I guess one last thing that I wanted to bring up, because I think we vaguely talked about it, but I don't remember for sure how in depth we got. But did you guys feel like it was interesting that that Gatsuda was a robot, that she got like rebuilt or revived and then rebuilt, and then I guess like, did you think that was interesting? And also, I feel bad for her because she kept dying and then kept being brought back. It was like a never-ending nightmare. It's like she just couldn't die in peace. She just kept being brought back to be used by the aliens for their nefarious purposes.
That way, it kind of sucks.
Yeah.
Like, I did find her being a cyborg really interesting because I don't think we had seen that before in the Showa era. Also, it kind of like parallels Mechagodzilla in a way, in the vaguest sense, I guess. But I thought it was a cool addition to this franchise, and like, it really does suck that she died, and then basically was like told, no, you cannot like talk to people outside the outside people, and like we're going to like basically use you to mind control Mechagodzilla. Like, that really sucks. But then like, I wish it could have been developed more, but like her like conflict about humanity and stuff, and then all of that. I think adding cyborgs to the Godzilla franchise is a very fun addition, because why not, right? Because you got aliens, we got giant monsters. Might as well add cyborgs onto the list too.
I agree. I mean, might as well, gotta complete the trifecta or quadrifecta. I don't remember how many we just listed, but but yeah, I feel like cyborgs are kind of a natural fit at this point with everything else that they've done. They've done basically everything short of like magic, so everything else sci-fi is kind of fair game. They quite literally do what you said, where like she is kind of a stand-in for Mechagodzilla, because they literally put Mechagodzilla's controller inside of her. They're just intertwined thematically and literally in the movie. In which, like, I will say, I'll give him props for this part of the movie because I wasn't expecting it, but was not expecting them to have Katsuda unalive herself at the end. So, like, self-sacrifice. They had a very Wanda and Vision moment there at the end where it was like, no, you have the thing inside of you that the bad guys need, and no, I can't let go of you. Although obviously, like, they actually went through with it, and this one it was Katsuda that had to do the final blow. But
Everything goes back to Marvel with you, doesn't it?
look, there's so many of those movies. There's too many points of reference. All right.
I mean, the MCU actually, do you know what number they're at right now?
I lost count. I mean, also depends on if you count shows or not.
Like, not counting shows. Anyways.
They might be in like the 30s, honestly. I don't know.
Well, Godzilla's at 36, so they gotta be really close to that. But like, Godzilla is a long-running franchise from the 50s, so there's bound to be connections to the MCU, because that is, I would say, the fastest growing long like franchise that could compete with Godzilla, with the exception of maybe James Bond.
There's 34 MCU movies. Wow.
Ooh, Godzilla's still beating them. Thank you, Godzilla.
Till
creators.
next year.
No, right now, let me just be happy with the fact that Godzilla's still beating the MCU in movie count.
Well, I was gonna say what's crazy about that is Godzilla and James Bond have been around since like the 50s, 60s, 70s. I don't know when the first James Bond movie came out, but Godzilla at least has been around since the 50s. Marvel has only been around since 2008 and is like already nearly catching up. The output of the MCU is insane. Like
it really is, and they're basically speed running what like James Bond and Godzilla did. Like, even with the quality of the movies of the MCU, you could very much put it into different like eras that you can for the Godzilla movies. Whereas like these ones are like a little more like this, or these ones are a little more like this. This is where it kind of goes downhill, but then like rises back up. Like, it's very fascinating and cool to like compare and contrast and see the connections, which if I had time I would write a whole paper on, which I don't have time to do, which kind of sad. But it makes sense to call back to like the MCU or to the DCEU or to James Bond or whatever other major big franchises that there are, cuz we all live in this world and we all know the stories and the like traditional like stories or traditional like elements of storytelling, and they're just in everything because that's what makes storytelling I guess. Maybe. I don't know. I'm not a storyteller. I just like watching and listening to people tell stories.
Those are some fair points, Miranda. And I mean, yeah, at the end of the day, it's just, yeah, I've watched all the Marvel movies several times, so a lot. Like, it is kind of interesting to think about, like, whether or not people that watched these movies growing up or something, maybe like that's what inspired the moments in those movies, or if it's just one of those things of like history just repeats itself. So maybe they have never watched this movie before. Probably not. Who's to say? And then they're like writing the scene, and then it just happens to be like a similar setup or whatever. But well, it's kind of like, I think it was one of the first episodes we did, if I remember correctly. I could be completely wrong, but I think they did like a very similar thing like Top Gun Maverick, you know, and we were like, we had the whole thing of like, oh, I wonder if someone like Christopher McQuarrie or Tom Cruise or Joseph Kosinski watched that specific Godzilla movie and whatever, but it's like probably not. They probably just thought of this like military operation that would work with the Top Gun Maverick team and blah 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 blah. But again, it's just kind of interesting to think, or interesting to see these parallels in not just like history, but in cinema history, and how, I mean, ultimately, nothing is unique. Like, we're all inspired by things that have come before us, and it's, even if like something is kind of like basically a new idea, there's always inspiration on like how to get to that thing from someone else and blah 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 blah. So it is kind of interesting to think about. But anyway, I think I'm getting a little off topic here.
To jump back a bit, we've completed the Showa era, which is really cool. It only took us a year and 9 months to do so, but here we are. We did cover the MonsterVerse in the middle of that, and Godzilla -1, and Monarch, so, you know. But we've basically completed the Showa era, and again, that's really amazing. And we've already kind of touched on this earlier in this episode, but I'm just curious on what you think of the Showa era in general, and like, do you think this movie was a good conclusion to the Showa era, even though it wasn't technically, like, Toho didn't say this is the end. It just happened that this was the last movie they made, and then 9 years passed. So, do you think what we did get was a good bookend to this era? And then, like, if you have any closing thoughts on the era in general.
Yeah, I can't believe we're already here at the end of the Showa era. My overall thoughts on the Showa era, I mean, it's hard for me to really criticize it because it was the very first era of Godzilla movies. They were trying to figure out what Toho was trying to figure out what exactly it wanted to do with Godzilla, what type of character they wanted Godzilla to be. Do we want him to be a grotesque monster that is a symbol for nuclear radiation or an allegory for nuclear radiation? Or do we want him to be a giant kaiju superhero that fights for mankind? I do enjoy the Showa era. It's so interesting to like see the different types of movies we got. Like, 'cause it starts off pretty serious with the 1954 film, and then like Godzilla Raids Again kind of tried to do the same thing as the 1954 film, but delved off into more like just silly, campy monster movie territory. And then King Kong versus Godzilla was the first one to be like, no, we're just going to do like silly, fun, campy monster movie stuff. And then like, Mothra versus Godzilla tried to do something different. It tried to be like a silly, campy monster movie while also trying to tell a compelling story with the whole like businessman like trying to profit off of Mothra's egg, and then like Mothra's egg like not belonging here and whatnot. It almost had like kind of an environmental message, so like, and then like Godzilla versus Hedorah really did hammer in on that environmental message. So it's really interesting to just see all the different like concepts that came together to make all the different films that exist in this era. That being said, and I apologize to my Showa era fans out there. I know plenty of you exist, but this is my least favorite era of Godzilla movies. Don't get me wrong. It's not because like, oh, like compared to like more like the more modern Godzilla movies, these movies look bad and whatnot. No, that's not the case. But I just feel like the other eras of Godzilla, like they're not as long, and I feel like they just don't have as many bad movies per se. Like the Heisei era, I love that, and that's the era we'll be covering next. I love the Heisei era. There's really only one movie in the Heisei era that I don't really like. And then same with the Millennium era too. Like there's not many movies in the Millennium era that I dislike as well, but there's quite a few movies in the Showa era that like if I were to choose a Godzilla movie to watch, probably quite a few movies in the Showa era would not be my first choice. But that being said, I'm not trying to downplay the Showa era or say like it is the worst era of Godzilla movies, but it is definitely my least favorite era. But there's still some good things that the Showa era gave us. It gave us a foundation for Godzilla movies. It gave us aliens, aliens will show up in later Godzilla movies. It gave us all these different sci-fi aspects that Toho could go in and play around with. So I do really appreciate the Showa era, and it deserves its place in the history of Godzilla movies. And you guys don't have to do this, but I think it would be kind of a fun idea for us to like say what our favorite like suit was from the Showa era. And I've thought about it for a bit, and I gotta say, I think my favorite suit is probably the Mothra versus Godzilla suit. I just like, because like it takes like all the aspects from the 54 film with the dorsal plates and whatnot. I just like the design, especially the design of the head. It doesn't look too frumpy or like Cookie Monster-ish like Son of Godzilla. And like the suit itself doesn't look like super cheap either. So I would have to say that the Mothra versus Godzilla suit is probably my favorite suit to come out of the Showa era. But yeah, overall, I think the Showa era was a good starting point for the Big G. And in my opinion, at least, it only goes up from here. But what about you guys? How are you guys feeling on the Showa era now that we've finally finished this 15 film run?
Yeah, I agree with what you were talking about, Dan, how this might not be like the best overall era of Godzilla, or might not contain all the best, like, knockout after knockout, like best of the best Godzilla movies. But I mean, it was the beginning, and it set up a solid base of what's to come, and definitely has a lot of heart and charm to it that I feel like at first glance to most people wouldn't be that noticeable. But honestly, I mean, like the more that you watch these, if you really give them a shot, you really do find a lot to appreciate here. And at the end of the day, I mean, they're just fun, silly monster movies, like what more could you ask for like retro kaiju movies where it's just people in suits duking it out and like practical effects and miniatures and all this stuff. It's just like, in a way, it's just kind of what like filmmaking is about, like not every movie is like this, but if you're making a big spectacle, it doesn't really get any more pure than this. And I mean, again, like there's plenty more movies that look better than these that even came out during that time. I mean, like Alien was about a couple of decades after the first Godzilla movie and whatever, but like that looks really good, or like Star Wars, Blade Runner, et cetera, et cetera. Like there's other movies that are like a bit newer than these that looked quite better than like the effects that they had in these. But I mean, those are also more like Hollywood productions, and for having seemingly smaller budgets over in Japan, and for just having less resources and whatever, et cetera. Like I really do feel like they were able to make just a really impressive body of work here. In maybe a lot of it is technical, but again, that doesn't take away from the fact that that a lot of these are just fun movies to watch. And if you were like a kid growing up around this time, I bet it was probably like the highlight of every. It was like the MCU, like a kid growing up during the MCU. I'm sure it was like the highlight of the year every single year. You're like, oh man. Well, except for if you were a kid who grew up with the first Iron Man, and then you had to wait 2 years for the next one, and then you had to wait a couple of more years, and blah 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 blah. Then it became kind of a yearly thing. Not that definitely not speaking from experience. But yeah, like these were probably really cool yearly releases if you were a kid growing up at the time. So yeah, but that all being said, yeah, I mean, the original is just a timeless classic, and I mean, yeah, it's like inherently a little silly, but I just think that film is just such an important body of work, and found such an interesting way to cover something so dark and impactful that occurred during our history as as a human race. And the fact that all these movies stemmed from that original, like it's crazy. It's crazy to think that, if that original one hadn't existed, like none of this would exist. And I think the world would be a much worse world without it, without Godzilla and all this whole Toho universe that they've made, and just these characters. So very, very cool that all this got to be made, and that they got to try all these different things, and got to see the evolution of all these films and these creatures and everything like that.
Just want to say, well, I do agree. I think the world would be worse off without Godzilla. The 54 film was created because of the bombings on Nagasaki and Japan, and Hiroshima. The world would be better off without those bombings, though. So just to say.
Yeah, sorry, I should have had that disclaimer. Yeah,
yeah,
that's a fair. Yeah, good on you to bring that up, because yeah, I definitely did not mean that. But the Godzilla movies definitely transformed from like where they began, and have kind of spun off into like their own thing. But I definitely feel like, especially with -1 that came out last year, they're still a vehicle for important stories that we still have yet to hear out and see. And so it's exciting to think about what we might see in the future with Godzilla projects and Godzilla adjacent projects. But yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to the future. And as someone who initially wasn't like super hyped about watching all these Godzilla movies, like I'm glad I decided to do this, and it's been a really fun time to not only like connect with you guys on like a different level, just because like, again, I'd never really watched these movies, but also just to like experience something new. And like inadvertently, this has really opened up my palette and my taste to a bunch of different, like a whole plethora of other movies that I never like would have really probably cared that much for, and given me a new appreciation for filmmaking and storytelling and just art, I guess. Because I mean, yeah, like these are all art, and everything that they did to make these movies, like the poster designs, the set design, the suit designs, the miniatures, like all of that is art. And it's just really cool to see all these people getting to create their art and work together and make these fun movies.
I also just want to add on, because Miranda had also somewhat asked us if how we felt about Terror of Mechagodzilla being like the final movie in the Showa era. While I do think that Destroy All Monsters would have been a better like send off for Showa era Godzilla, one thing that I do kind of like is that Ishiro Honda directed this movie. So not only did he direct the first movie in the Showa era, but he also directed the last movie in the Showa era. And I think you can't get any more poetic than that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Dan, and that's a good point because, yeah, I forgot to say this too, but I agree. Again, yet as always, you have very solid takes that I end up agreeing with a lot. Yeah, I do feel like Destroy All Monsters would have been probably a more logical ending point. Like if they had planned on ending the Showa era at a certain specific point, like that probably would have made the most sense. So like in a way, the last few movies did kind of feel like just kind of bonus, like just kind of things that we weren't meant to like have in a way. But obviously to like, and I don't mean that in like a negative way, but just like it just felt like bonus material that like it was just kind of like extra, like, oh crap, like we can keep making more of these, like let's just keep doing it. And so like I'm glad that they did because I mean again, like one of my favorites in the whole series, at least so far, but is Godzilla versus Hedorah. And I mean if they had stopped at Destroy All Monsters, like we would have never gotten that movie. And I really did like that one a lot, so I'm glad that we were able to get that one. Just to wrap up real quick on my thoughts, and before passing it on to Miranda, I think my favorite suit in the Showa era is the suit from Invasion of Astro Monster. I just think it was the right amount of like original Godzilla and not too frumpy and not too lumpy either. And like his face design like looks kind of aggressive in like a fun way and not doesn't look just kind of like a badly painted model. And I say that with love. But yeah, I'm gonna go with that one. But yeah, what about you, Miranda?
I mean, you guys pretty much covered a lot of what I was probably gonna say, so I guess I'll just kind of echo what you guys are saying. I think that Terror of Mechagodzilla is a interesting conclusion to the Showa era. I don't really know what they would have done if we're going to plan on ending it. I feel like it would be something along the lines of I think you guys said Destroy All Monsters. That would make sense. But like since they weren't actually they didn't have intention to ending it and we've just the fan base has like categorized it as the end, I think having the Showa era finish off with Mechagodzilla was a good choice, even if it was accidental, because Mechagodzilla is cool and his movies are intriguing. And I like the fact that Terror Mechagodzilla was made in a unique way via the story contest and all of that jazz. So I find that really cool. The Showa era in general for me, I really like it.
Mothra
versus Godzilla, which is my favorite Godzilla movie out of the Showa era. There are other ones that I like King Ghidorah's good. Like Invasion of Astro Monster, like that one. There's some really weird ones like Hedorah. There's just something in each movie that a viewer can be intrigued by or like find interesting, which I think is really cool because like they're not all good and they're not all bad. But I think for like the first run of Godzilla movies, I think that it was done in a very cool way and really you can see the evolution of sci-fi within just these 15 films. And the fact that the film started off with like a very specific, serious, we're commenting on what happened with the bombs in World War II and how that affected Japan and all that, and then slowly evolved into silly monster fights is really interesting too. Because I don't think they could have all been super serious. I don't think Godzilla could succeed by only being super serious. So for them to turn it into a like giant superhero, atomic lizard, although most of the time he's not really a hero, he's kind of the bad guy, or at least neutral. It's really fascinating. Yeah, so I mean, if you haven't watched the Showa era and yet you're listening to this podcast, I would recommend anyone watching it. Show it to your friends. That's what I did, and that's why we're here with this podcast, because I was like, I would like to watch all of them, and I would like to watch all of them with my friends. So here we are. It's just been cool to hear your guys' thoughts throughout the Showa era from the beginning to now, and I think in general as podcasters we've also grown with our skills in podcasting and our movie tastes, and we've kind of figured out, at least for me, I've kind of figured out what I like and what I dislike in kaiju movies, so I'm super excited to go into the next era of Godzilla movies. I like the Showa era. I like this movie. I'm just happy to be here, and I'm glad that we get to do this. Oh, also, I think I may have already said this, but it's very fascinating to see the evolution of sci-fi from 54 to 75, and you get to do it with one specific character, and you can see the evolution or how trends are working or like what is happening in time. There's like, is it before the space race? Oh, the space race happened. Oh, James Bond became popular. Oh, Planet of the Apes became popular. How are these movies calling back to that or referencing that, or how are these influenced? Like for Terror of Mechagodzilla, I was watching it and I was like, this chrome set here is reminding me of like classic Doctor Who, and it's like, or like sometimes it reminds me of Star Trek, and it's just really cool to see how all of that stuff is intertwined and just learn about the movie history and the history of sci-fi in general, specifically Godzilla, and just like the world at the time these were being made. So I find it very fascinating.
I realized I never really said what my favorite movie in the Showa era is. So I'll go ahead and I'll say that real quick. Boring. I shouldn't say it's the boring choice, but like the obvious choice is the 1954 film. I think most people are gonna say that the 1954 film is their favorite movie in the Showa era.
It's definitely the most well-made one, and it's definitely in my
Yeah.
top like 5 of Showa films.
Yeah. So I would be lying if I said that the 1954 film wasn't my favorite movie in the Showa era. But I want to choose something more unique than that, because everybody's going to say the 1954 film. Now, did you mention that Mothra versus Godzilla was your favorite as well, Miranda?
Yep, I love Mothra, and I think that movie is just a really fun, and it's like one of the like 5 that I've actually like watched more than twice.
I'm going to agree with you, Miranda. I'm going to say that's probably my favorite in the Showa era.
It's just really cool.
Yeah, I really like that one too.
I mean, they're all cool.
Yeah. But that one, yeah, is probably my favorite, with Invasion of Astro Monster being a runner-up.
Good choices. Good choices.
Just to add mine real quick, because I don't remember if I said my favorite in the show era, but it's, aside from the 54 one, of course, it's Godzilla versus Hedorah. That one's definitely like a very high up there for me. Just like in general, from like the Godzilla movies we watched, and just kaiju related films in general. I just really like that one.
It's also a really good choice. Okay, it's time for the lizard fact of the day. The lizard of the day is the azure-tailed skink. It's a species of skink that is widespread in the specifically Polynesia and the Hawaii Islands. The skink is technically not native to Hawaii and are considered canoe lizards because they came to the islands of Hawaii with Polynesian voyagers. The most identifiable physical trait of the lizard is its blue tail that is very vibrant, and bright blue isn't normally seen in the animal kingdom. So, kind of unique in that way. So that's the lizard fact of the day. It is now time for our star ratings. Udi, what would you give Terror of Mechagodzilla?
This one is, I think I probably said this in the last few ones too, but this one's kind of hard to rate just because it's not bad. It's just not super memorable either. And I don't know. I don't really have a lot to say. But kind of comparing it, because I don't remember if I mentioned this before on the podcast, but I have like a list of my rankings for various different kaiju movies and whatnot, and all the ones that we watched so far on the pod. Going by those ratings of the other movies nearby where I put it, probably give it a 2, I guess. Like, I could go with a 2.5 as well. Honestly, like I'm kind of in that space where it's either or really. But judging by the other movies that it's by, I'll probably just give it a 2. It's really not bad. It's not a bad movie. It is just kind of it did just kind of feel a little formulaic, I guess. Like I said at the beginning, it felt like it took XYZ thing from the last few movies, or I mean, yeah, just from like the last few movies, and just replaced it with a new version of this or that, and then kind of just set up the antagonist that Godzilla's gonna have to fight at the end for 20 minutes, and then you set up this human plot that's gonna get resolved fairly quickly, and that's kind of it. And there were a few movies that kind of branched out or did like slightly more unique things, but yeah, like the last, like I would say like 3-ish movies have all kind of been the same sort of setup and just kind of changed out like what the aliens are or like the main kaiju with the film or whatever. But yeah, so I'll go with a 2.
Okay, and Dan, what would you give Terror of Mechagodzilla?
Yeah, so I largely agree with Udi. Like, as I've said before, this was definitely one of those Showa era movies that was just like, all right, it's another Showa era film. Like, it's pretty formulaic. I do appreciate the attempt at trying to tell a deeper story with the android lady and whatnot and the scientist. But that being said, once again, it's not really explored that much. And if it would have been explored more, maybe my rating would be a little higher. But I'm going to go with the 2.5. I don't think this is a bad Showa era movie, as I've said before, but I would probably watch quite a few other Showa era movies before watching this one.
I'm gonna give this movie a 3 because it's fun. It's got Mechagodzilla in it. It has an interesting story. I found a lot of cool things in it. Also, the history of it too. So I'm gonna give it a 3, which means the Atomic Lizard's average score for Terror of Mechagodzilla is a 2.5. Thank you so much for joining us and listening to our conversation about Terror of Mechagodzilla, and for listening to all of our Showa era conversations. It's been really fun making them. If you're interested in hearing more, check out our previous episodes, and as always, you can find us on Instagram at Atomic Lizards Pod and on Letterboxd at Atomic_Lizards.